It was just 3 years ago that the phrase viral video entered our lexicon. By 2012, viral videos were a powerful social force, catapulting unlikely stories into the world's news cycle, all by the power of a spontaneous online audience. Their currency, of course, is the hit count. Take the case of a camera phone video that appeared online in the spring of 2012. It showed 4 middle school students cruelly taunting their Rochester, New York bus monitor. The story took on a life of its own. Within a week, it generated more than 7 million hits and hundreds of news stories worldwide. As Karen Klein became a cause celeb, a Toronto man, Max Sidorov, began an online campaign to raise a few $1,000s for Miss Klein. The idea was to afford the beleaguered bus monitor a modest vacation. That appeal raised more than $700,000 and inspired Miss Klein to create a foundation to promote anti-bullying. Karen Klein and Max Sidorov came here first to share their story.
It's hard to believe that people can do that to other people. You know, it just, yes, I was hurt very much, but I wasn't going to let them know that I was. You know, I didn't want to give them satisfaction.
And they clearly wanted to make you cry. That's what they headlined it. Now, it was the first time you experienced that kind of abuse.
Oh, yes.
On the bus.
Yes.
Yeah. Max, you saw that on YouTube 2 days after it happened to Karen. What was your reaction to it at the time?
Well, when I was watching, I couldn't finish it. I mean, I think I speak for most people. I couldn't finish watching the video. I just couldn't believe how people, kids, these are middle school kids, right? How could anyone treat anyone like that? Especially a bus monitor, right? So, I mean, it just happened very fast, and I just thought about it. I had to do something about it. So I saw the video and went online and posted it up.
Bullying, cyber and otherwise, became part of the public buzz and the political agenda through 2012 with stories like Karen Klein's. Yet for all the strategies and programs to date, the problem continues, which caused us to ask author and bullying expert Barbara Coloroso how we're getting anti-bullying wrong.
Step one is we define it inappropriately. It is a conscious, willful act intended to harm where you get pleasure from somebody else's pain. But we often say it's an action that's continuous and repeated over time. But don't you think once called a gross sexual name, once dunked in the toilet, once relationally bullied on the internet matters? You see, we have to say it is often continuous and repeated. But it's an act of meanness where you attack another human being, get pleasure from their pain.
Bullying is the story of tragedy and cruelty, and sometimes the story of courage and, yes, faith. A lesson we gleaned from a young lady named Kirsten Marlowe.
Doesn't matter how hard it gets, how tough it may be, you've got to hold on, because that's all you've got. And if you need something to hold on to God.
In the spring of 2012, a nation's eyes turned to another remarkable young lady. At the age of 20, Ottawa's Elaine Campbell was diagnosed with advanced idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. She would require a double lung transplant. Never went away quietly, Elaine decided to trumpet the cause of organ donation. She contacted some major celebrities, including Justin Bieber and Ellen DeGeneres. Their support caused a spike in registered donors. As media attention peaked, Elaine came to the studio to discuss the role faith played in her story, a story she isn't often asked to tell. And I asked her how she saw God at work.
I've never asked why me, you know, because this has been kind of just my life was always on the go, that I didn't really, you know, take time to even really focus on God. It was just, life was always on the go. And ultimately, I have no choice but to stop and kind of reassess everything going on. So for me, I never asked why, because I never really looked at that side of things until this. And it's kind of, going through this is kind of opening my eyes to a bigger look and a bigger perspective on faith.
In August, the world's scientific community had its sights very much on heaven, well, or the heavenlies, with a successful landing on the Mars rover. Curiosity. Though its top speed is just under 1 kilometer an hour, Curiosity's odometer clocked more than 500 million kilometers by the time it touched down in early August. Heaven was also on the minds of hundreds of thousands of avid readers as a literary phenomena swept through our culture. It was the true story of Colton, a 4-year-old boy from the small Nebraska town with an extraordinary story. Following emergency surgery, Colton described a journey to heaven. He recalled looking down and seeing the doctor operating and his father praying. He said he met his miscarried sister, whom no one had told him about, and he met his great-grandfather, who died 30 years before he was born. It was the impossible-to-know details that inspired his father, Todd Burpo, to write the book in his son's words, titled Heaven is for Real, which this month will almost certainly celebrate its 100th consecutive week on the New York Times bestseller list. We asked him why he resisted the urge to write it as a how-to book about preparing for heaven.
We wanted to share it as Colton shared it with us. And and as you look through the book, he talks about at the very beginning, Dad, you have to have Jesus in your heart. Dad, Jesus told me if you don't go to heaven, you don't get a new body. We didn't avoid anything. And some readers say we did, but if you look at all the things that Colton shared, it's in there. But we shared it the way he told it.
I know Colton titled the book Heaven is for Real, but his older sister's suggestion was he's back, but he's no angel. So are you a pretty normal family?
I tell people all the time, you know, isn't it great to know you don't have to be perfect before God can do a miracle in your life, because we're nowhere close.
Coming up, more on 2012 and the role God played in its stories. In 2012, Nick Wallenda, whose family is synonymous with high wire walks, added his name to the list of daredevils to enter Niagara lore. Names such as Farini and Blondin when he walked across the gorge. Unlike his predecessors, Nick crossed directly over the Horseshoe Falls. And while he did not hum Nearer My God to Thee, Network Mics did record Nick conversing with God. Not long before he made history, Nick joined us from Florida. I asked him why God would want him to walk a tightrope across Niagara.
I hope that what I do is very encouraging to others. You know, God's grace is powerful and strong, and questions like this come up often. I've done media interviews around the world, and you know, I've known since I was a child that God was going to put me on a platform and use me to bring people to his kingdom. And I knew that all along, and God, you know, he told me that when I was about 13 years old. He said two things. He said, I'm going to bless you beyond belief, and I'm going to use you to bring people to the kingdom. So I knew that that was coming. I was raised in a Christian household and was always ready for it. I just didn't know in what capacity it was going to be.
Water, as it so often does, dominated stories of life and death in 2012. Hurricane Sandy devastated the Atlantic coast in October. Once its winds had subsided, it had left behind well over 100 dead and damage in the billions of dollars. While on the other side of the world, entire cultures struggle to find the daily supply of clean water necessary to sustain life. Where was God? Very active, it seems, in the work of groups such as H2O for All. Co-founder Tim Muttoo told us why on earth he left a multi-billion-dollar company to dedicate himself to this ministry.
Water is the number one thing that we need to survive. It really is. And most of the diseases that are happening, most of the hospital beds that fill up the hospitals are all related to preventable diseases. And I really think God wants us to use our giftings and talents, wants us to say, well, what do we have to offer to somebody that might not have what we have?
Legendary Calgary newspaperman Bob Edwards once wrote, if it's all the same to history, it need not repeat itself anymore. He could easily have been referring to the Middle East of 2012, which saw a bloody civil war in Syria, Arab Spring aftershocks in Cairo, and an escalation of violence in Gaza. Just as provocative cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad sparked violence 7 years ago, anti-Islamic acts, including a caustic anti-Muslim film, stirred more violence, which included the assassination of U.S. Ambassador Christopher Stevens in Benghazi. We discuss the fallout when faith turns violent with Raheel Raza, founder of Muslims Facing Tomorrow, and Egyptian Christian activist Nader Fauzi. I began by remarking on the fatwa against Mr. Fauzi, an Islamic decree calling for his death.
Well, before I begin, let me also inform you, much to your horror, that I too have a fatwa on my head. So let me join the group. I have
goodness.
Death threats and a fatwa, but for entirely different reasons.
But we shouldn't make light of these.
No, we
These
should
are
not
real.
make light of it. What has happened in terms of the fatwa on Nader's head is absolutely horrible, unacceptable, atrocious, should not be part of any faith. It is, politically motivated, or actually where it's come from, only Nader can tell you, because, this is a shot out of the blue.
Nader, have you had any involvement with this film?
I have nothing to do with it. I didn't see the movie. I was shocked that they even mentioned my name.
Why then does the government of Egypt want to arrest you?
We have to go back 5 years ago. I'm activist, as you know, and Egypt always was denied that they are treating the Egyptian Christian bad.
And you put it all together in a book
Exactly.
5 years ago. Yeah. And that's when this began.
So
you put the persecutions.
So the Egyptian government decided to arrest me.
Shortly after that interview, the Egyptian government sentenced Toronto's Nader Fauzi to death in absentia. And while this new hatred flares, stories from past generations are emerging. One is of an extraordinary Christian woman, Marina Namat. As a teenager during the Iranian Revolution, she was arrested shortly after speaking out in a classroom. Here, she told us of how she coped with the torture and abuse that followed.
And then I was there, and I was ready to say I didn't know Jesus. I was ready to say anything. I was ready to do anything. And that was when I realized how difficult it is to stand up for what you believe in. The only person to look up to was, well, of course, was Jesus, because he was tortured and he was executed. So we had been in the same boat. And another thing that I had never understood and I had always questioned was that why on the cross did he say, Father, Father, why have you forsaken me? And I got it. I really, really got it. And when you lose everything and you realize that on your own you have no merit whatsoever, that you have betrayed everything you are, you have betrayed God, you have betrayed yourself, you have betrayed your family, you have betrayed your religion, what more can you do that is just horrible? And that was when I actually found that the person of Jesus on the cross, that's the only place I can go to become whole again, but it is not because of my merit, of my strength. It is his, not mine. And it was through that discovery that I started feeling really comfortable with who I was. And that was the moment, that was the moment of faith for me. I think for me, faith is the acceptance that I am nothing, absolutely. And there's no better place than a political prison, tied up to a torture bed, being raped, whatever, all of that, to discover that.
The stories of 2012 are like pieces in a puzzle. But what do they look like when we try to put them together? My final thoughts in a moment. Our year in review reminds us that our journalism at Context fills a unique niche. We've welcomed ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances and introduced a question so rarely asked in media. Where is God in all this? It's journalism that looks into events for the character of God, the reality of sin, and the reality of lives surrendered to Christ. People make choices differently when those three things are discovered. And those choices make the news we cover. At year end, we need to say thank you, as every episode we do only happens because we are completely donor supported by you, our viewers. So for all of us at Context, thank you. Thank you for standing with us. And we'll be back to look at life beyond the headlines in 2013.